Good afternoon. We'll get started. My name is Ann Siren. I'm the Interim Comprehensive Planning Manager for the town, and I'm joined by a group and staff making this happen today. Renee Phillips is running the webinar. Terry Lewis, Nicole Dixon, and Teresa Haley are joining me in the room, and Jamie Lopko is taking notes for us. So thanks to everyone for joining us. And I'd like to introduce or mention that Councilman Ames is also joining us today. This is a presentation on the town's short-term rental initiative. I'm going to do a presentation before we get into the questions and answer section. I want to mention a couple things. There is a Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. If you want to type a message, our staff will answer it during the presentation or during the Q&A. After the presentation, if you have a question, there is a raise hand button at the bottom of the screen that you can select to let us know that you have a question, and we'll answer that question. Just a note that this is a 2-hour webinar, so we'll be ending at 1 o'clock. And there are future meetings listed on the town's website if you're interested in joining additional meetings. Some of those stakeholder meetings are targeted at specific groups, but everyone's welcome to attend. And there will be a poll at the end of this webinar to ask if there's any ways that we can improve in the future. So please be sure to take that. So I will share my screen and start our presentation. Okay. So for today's presentation, I'll give an introduction to the project. We'll look at some short-term rental trends on the island. We'll review the project purpose statement and the timeline, the town's plan for public participation in this project, and our stakeholder list. We'll review the resources that are available on the town's website and the open town hall survey, which is open until January 31st if you haven't already taken it. And I'll review a summary of feedback we've received so far so you can hear what other folks are saying. And we'll review next steps and then how you can stay involved. So to start with an introduction to the project, the town is considering a predictable and balanced approach to manage the impacts of short-term rentals. The Public Planning Committee, which is a standing committee of town council, is directing this initiative. And staff provides updates and receives direction from the Public Planning Committee at their monthly meetings, which are the 4th Thursday of each month, starting at 10 a.m. I'm going to scoop something up. Let me just make sure I'm on the right slide. Yes, there we go. At the start of this project, the committee identified the following issues for examination and discussion. So we'll review the list here. The number of short-term rentals on the island and the trend of the increase in the number of short-term rentals on the island, the impacts of them on neighborhoods, the environment, and the island's infrastructure, the imbalance between residential and commercial districts, as traditionally residential neighborhoods shifted more towards commercial uses with the increased number of short-term rentals, the impacts on workforce housing availability, the lack of occupancy limits for single-family homes, and the lack of requirements for additional parking for single-family homes being used as short-term rentals, and nuisance issues such as noise, parking, and improper trash storage and disposal, as well as littering. And to take a look at some trends in the number of short-term rentals, obviously, since the development of Hilton Head as a modern resort community, we've had short-term rentals. But there's been a trend in recent years. The past 2 years specifically, we're looking at three trend lines with data from short-term rental monitoring companies. Those trend lines show an increase anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 units starting in September of 2019 to, let me just move the box here. Oops, excuse me. To, I believe the estimate is between 8,000 and 10,500 short-term rental units as of November of last year. So I'll describe some of the reason for the variation in the data later, but you can see obviously there's an increase in the number of units on the island. So the committee developed a project purpose statement based on this information. that as a resort area, Hilton Head has numerous short-term rental units. And the lack of a short-term rental ordinance has led to an imbalance between residential and resort districts and the elimination of some long-term single-family neighborhoods. So the town proposes to craft a short-term rental ordinance that will develop a fair, predictable, and balanced approach to manage the impacts of short-term rentals on neighborhoods, the economy, housing stock, public facilities, the quality of life of residents, and the experience of visitors. So the takeaway points are that short-term rentals are an important part of the island's economy, and I want to emphasize that. We've received feedback from a lot of folks who are short-term rental owners, and they're either part-time residents, full-time residents, or they don't live on the island. But we want to emphasize the fact that short-term rentals are important. Many of them are well managed, and we're not trying to cast a negative light on short-term rental owners. But there are some issues that need to be discussed and addressed. Specifically, we need to discuss ways to address nuisance issues, such as noise, parking, and trash disposal, and larger issues, such as occupancy and impacts on residential neighborhoods. At the start of this project, staff researched many other communities' short-term rental ordinances. We're obviously not the only resort community to have short-term rentals and not the only community to have some issues with some of the short-term rentals. We contracted with White & Smith, which is a consulting firm based in Charleston, to help us draft an ordinance. And we developed an initial public participation plan for the project. You can see here the project timeline. We're nearing the end of the public and stakeholder outreach and data development and research, the first portion of the project. Obviously, the stakeholder meeting, or this open house, is part of our public outreach. We've had a number of stakeholder meetings, open houses. We're having some in February as well. We want to get as much participation as possible so that we understand everyone's position and opinions about short-term rentals. We're also gathering data about short-term rentals to better understand the numbers and the trends. Regarding our plan for public participation, we identified a list of stakeholders and a plan to outreach those stakeholders. Again, we're offering additional meetings that anyone is welcome to attend. Some of those are targeted, but everyone's welcome to attend those meetings. We're capturing public input with an online survey. And if you haven't taken that yet, please do, and share it with your neighbors and friends. The survey's had over 2,100 responses so far. We're very pleased. And it's a good, you can actually see all of the feedback that folks have given. The names aren't listed, but you can see their comments. So it's a good idea to see what other folks are saying. Staff is providing updates during the Public Planning Committee's monthly meetings. Again, those are the fourth Thursday of each month at 10 a.m. And the next one is January 27th. There's also a short-term rental initiative page on the town's website with a number of resources, and we'll take a look at that. And we're trying to update everyone through email, social media, interviews. And so make sure that you sign up for project updates on the town's website so you can stay involved. List of stakeholder groups that we've identified include short-term rental owners, large resort communities, specifically Sea Pines, Shipyard, and Palmetto Dunes do allow short-term rentals, and the other large gated communities such as Indigo Run don't. Neighborhood POAs and HOAs, realtors, the Chamber of Commerce, utility companies, the Gullah community, property management and rental companies, South Island residents, we had a meeting this morning for them, Mid and North Island residents, we had a meeting yesterday, and the Home Builders Association and the Sheriff's Office. You'll see here on the town's website, this is the landing page for the short-term rental initiative. There's the project purpose statement at the top, and then you can see a button to take the online survey. There are previous presentations, meetings, upcoming meetings and events, the project timeline, and a form to submit a question if you have one. And then you can sign up for project updates here. Again, the open town hall survey is open until January 31st, so please be sure to take that. And again, you can view the results online so you can see what other folks are saying. I want to review some of the feedback that we've received. Some of this may resonate with you. If there's something that isn't in here, please be sure to mention that during our comment section. First is the island's brand. Everyone recognizes that Hilton Head is a unique resort community. We need to maintain that brand to maintain our position in the market. There's some concern that the number of short-term rentals, and I think more specifically the nuisance issues that have come up related to them, may be doing a disservice to that brand. So I think that's a discussion that needs to take place. In terms of data, there's a desire to make sure we understand the trend in short-term rentals. We have data from before the pandemic and today, and we can see there's clearly an increase in the number of short-term rentals. Now, I'm not sure if that's going to hold in the future, but I think if we get additional data, we can really dial in to understand the numbers and locations of short-term rentals on the island, and staff's working on that right now. We've received a number of comments about enforcement. Folks who experience specific nuisance issues have said that we need quick enforcement. There needs to be clearly identified contact information and a way for these issues to be resolved quickly. Folks have concerns about environmental impacts, specifically trees. There's been a few statements about large buildings being built on small lots and trees being taken down as a result of that. There are questions and comments we've received about gated and private communities. If the town enacts an ordinance, will it apply to them? What about private covenants? And how do those, are there any conflicts between those? There have been comments and questions about the town's legal authority to regulate short-term rentals and a current bill in state legislation that would prohibit municipalities from prohibiting short-term rentals. So we're keeping an eye on that. There have been comments about the location of short-term rentals. There are some areas that are more neighborhood focused and some areas that are more short-term rental focused. Should regulations apply island-wide or should they apply to specific areas? And that ties into the next comment about neighborhood zoning and land use, that I think transition from single-family neighborhoods to more short-term rental or visitor-focused areas is an area of concern for a lot of folks. We've received comments and complaints about noise, both daytime and nighttime violations. We've received questions and comments about the number of short-term rentals and the island's capacity. Some folks are in favor of a limit on the number of rentals on the island, and some folks say there shouldn't be. We've received questions about occupancy. This morning there were, someone said, you'll have a rental with 24 people can stay in one single family house. Should there be a limit on that? And should there be a minimum stay, minimum night stay of 4 or 5 nights? We've received questions and comments about parking. Folks are concerned that people who are putting too many vehicles on one site creates a safety hazard. And there are general comments about the quality of life and the impact of residents from short-term rentals. We've received comments and questions about taxes and licensing. Starting January 1st of this year, a business license is required for short-term rentals, even if you own just one unit, which was previously exempt. So we've received questions about that. We've received questions about the time frame. If regulations go into effect, how much time would I have to comply? Or would my property be grandfathered in? We've heard about traffic. There's an increase in traffic because of the number of folks who are staying in a place, and there are safety concerns related to that. And then we've received comments about trash being put in the wrong spot or folks littering. That's the list of some of the summary feedback. We received the list of issues. And I want to emphasize again that these are issues that we're discussing and shouldn't reflect negatively on all short-term rentals. We understand that many short-term rental owners are responsible, they take care of their property and they're aware of what's happening. But there are issues that we'd like to discuss. But in light of the fact that we understand the importance of short-term rentals to the island's economy and that many owners are responsible. The next steps for the project include continuing our stakeholder meetings and open houses. Those links are on the town website where you registered for this meeting. The next public planning committee meeting is Thursday, January 27th, starting at 10 a.m. You can view that on the town's public meetings Facebook page. You don't need a Facebook account to register or to view that meeting. You don't need to register. You just click on the link in the town's website. We'll be publishing an agenda and packet for that meeting shortly, so you can see what's going to happen in the upcoming meeting and have a chance to participate. Please be sure to sign up for project updates. We'll send out email notifications of upcoming meetings. If there's any news, we'll send it to you through those project updates. Please feel free to attend another the stakeholder meetings, our open house that we have scheduled in the future, and let folks know that we're having those, please. If you haven't already, please take the open town hall survey. And you can see there the list of upcoming public planning committee meetings. Be sure to put those on your calendar. And you can submit comments or speak during any of those meetings. And just another note on this landing page for the town short-term rental initiative, we have here this sign up for project updates button. So that's how you find that and get on that email list. That concludes my presentation on short-term rentals. And I just want to remind you, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and staff will respond to your comments while we're chatting. And then there's a raise hand button on the bottom of your screen. And that's how we'll know that you have a comment or question. So if you hit the raise hand button, we'll let you know that we're going to take your question or comment. All right. Do we have any questions or comments?
Yeah. If you want to give me the questions out loud.
Sure. Okay.
We do have one.
Oh, we do have one.
Mr. Thomas.
Oh, Mr. Thomas?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
I have, we currently live here 5 months of the year in Palmetto Dunes. I've been coming to the island since 1977. So we're basically 5 months of the year residents. We live in Pennsylvania during the summer. We purchased this home, obviously knowing that we could utilize short-term rentals as a form of revenue. And we have some very long-term, still would qualify short-term rentals. One summer resident is now here for a full month and another for 3 weeks. And we're concerned that by restricting short-term rentals, we may fall in some sort of restriction and be limited in terms of our short-term rentals. And one of my concerns is that whether the city has studied what the impact will be on the revenues if you eliminate short-term rentals. We currently pay $19,000 a year in property tax. Our next door neighbor, who is a full-time resident and basically a house very similar to ours, pays about $6,000 a year. So if you make it impossible for us to pursue short-term rentals, obviously we're not going to continue to pay $19,000 a year in property tax. And the revenues that we generate from owning this property, 25% of that revenue it goes directly to pay the property tax here. And of course, in addition to that, we're paying the accommodation tax and I'm probably other fees that don't come to mind immediately. So I'm concerned about whether or not the city has actually studied what the impact could be in terms of the financial impact to the city if the short-term rentals are eliminated and you lose that tax base of the non-residents.
Sure. Thank you, sir, for your comment. We've heard that comment from a number of folks this morning and in previous stakeholder meetings and in the surveys. I think we understand that we need to carefully consider any regulations that we propose for short-term rentals to consider the economic ramifications for the owner and for the community. We appreciate that point. Thank you. Mr. Green?
Yes, it's actually Donna Green, his wife. We kind of have the same situation as the previous speaker. We are part-time residents. I just have some suggestions because we do also have some other property that we are part-time residents in. So for example, for a 5-bedroom home, maybe you could limit the amount of people to, let's say, 12 or 13. In our case, it's usually a grandparent that pays for their kids to come and then their grandkids. And the other 3 people beyond the 5 bedrooms are usually a crib or children sleeping on a pull-out sofa, something like that. So one thing you might want to consider is number of bedrooms, double that by 2. So that gives you 10, and then allow just a couple of extra people. The other thing we do is that we have a trash pickup twice a week. So we don't have any problem with trash or littering in our area at all. The third thing that we do is that we have quite a severe contract for the people that stay at our place. In other words, there is a quiet time after 10 o'clock. They have to sign the contract. They are aware that it is a residential area. We also have a pickleball court, which we do say, that they can have fun, et cetera, but they can't start too early. In other words, we don't encourage anybody to play before 8 o'clock, for example. The other thing is that we have a very large driveway that also has a circular component. So let's say if you have 5 bedrooms, you have to have sufficient parking for 5 cars. So if you are reasonable, I can understand how some people might be renting and say there's 24 people and they only have 4 or 5 bedrooms. That's really not acceptable. Also, they have to show that they have garbage pickup and maybe the appropriate number of cans. So we have 2, because there's so much recycling, we have 4 cans in 2 separate areas that the garbage is then put into, and the garbage people pick this up twice a week. Another thing that we do is we're very careful, and I'm sorry to say this sounds kind of strange maybe to you, but I don't have any rentals where it's all single people. I don't have any rentals where people are very young. So we really try, this is a home that we live in as well. We want it to be treated well. We do have quite a high damage deposit so that they understand that if they damage anything, they have to take responsibility for it. So we do limit it to kind of extended families in our case. Now, I understand if somebody has a rental that is just full-time rental, then that's something different. But for example, if you limit your rentals to half a year, let's say 25 to 27 weeks, that also just really carries the bulk of the time, which is at the summertime, and the rest of the time is kind of quiet. The people who rent all year, I've heard of, renting for a ridiculously low sum on very short amount of days in a residence, and I can see how that can be a problem. The other thing is we only accept weekly rentals, unless I would have to say it's 1% of the time that we do not, that we would take something shorter than a week, and it would only be a 5-day stretch or something because of the way the bookings went. So all of those things have allowed us to have a very reasonable relationship in our neighborhood.
Thank you very much for your comments, Ms. Green. Those best practices like that, I think have been incorporated formally into some other communities' ordinances, even local communities. And we've been taking a look at those for examples. I have heard, and that's a good point that you make about occupancy of adults with children. There may be a fine point that could be made about the number of, if we're going to consider an occupancy limit, considering those under 18 or a different age. And I appreciate your point about education, educating guests about what the community expectations are. That's a conversation we've had and will continue to have. Thank you very much for your comments. Mr. Hall?
Hey, how are you? Several things. I have seen in Sea Pines the worst violations being by rental companies that don't tell their renters the rules. And I think that needs to be spoken to somehow, that the rental companies need to be responsible for them. I mean, if they rent a 4-bedroom car place out with 6 passes, obviously there's a problem there. Second, like most, I am a full-time resident, except for health reasons, I can't live in the community in the summertime. So I rent actually in the summer to pay my mortgage and so forth since I'm retired. And I think the city should consider following the state and county that a short-term rental is not one that rents less than 72 days, that those are considered full-time residents, which they are by the state and county. And I think that would be, and then obviously you have to address those places that are businesses. On my street in Sea Pine, 3 out of my 5 neighbors are owned by the same company who rent out full time. And that's a big difference from us that rent part-time, live here, and use that income to help pay our retirement expenses.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I appreciate your points. We've heard, actually just this morning, we heard a very similar comment from a number of folks who either live here full-time or part-time and rent out their property. And I think there's a wide range of types of short-term rental owners. We hear from folks who are rent things out full-time and it's a business for them. Folks who rent, half the year, live here half the year. And then we heard from folks who, just rent out for the week of heritage, especially if they're in Sea Pines. But I think I take your point that I think it would be very beneficial to establish expectations for guests. Thank you for your comments. Mr. Skelton?
Yes, good morning. I live in Palmetto Dunes. I'm also a part-time resident. I echo a lot of what has been said already. And I look at this whole situation as a tax grab. Now that the town is getting involved here and they want a piece of the action. I pay my taxes a lot. I pay triple what my neighbors pay. Now, I don't get garbage pickup from the town. Only thing we get, and I guess you throw some money at, since we're doing infrastructure right now in Palmetto Dunes, I guess that you're paying some money towards some of our renewals, but we're hiring the contractors and looking after those things. But overall, I just look at it as a tax grab. Palmetto Dunes, we've instituted a short-term rental policy that came into effect of January 1st, 2021, and it seems to be working good. I think unless there's a problem out of gated communities, as you said earlier, there's only 3 communities that actually allow short-term rentals. Is there a big problem why the town's getting involved with this, or is it just looking for more revenue?
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Skelton. I will say that we have heard, and you can see in the survey results online, there are a number of residents who do have concerns. I think that we would need to carefully consider taxes and fees as part of the conversation and understand any additional burdens that we'd be placing on short-term rental owners before moving forward with any regulations. I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Oh, Mr. McCammon?
Yeah, I've been a resident in Sea Pines for over 2 decades in the same patio lot community. And probably a couple years ago, one of the properties existed about a year and was purchased from a family by a off-site investor. And it has been used around the year as solely a rental property we're in a patio lot community. This property rents for over $1,000 a night frequently. And it has a postage stamp driveway. And oftentimes it has got 6 SUVs parked in it, 2 in the garage and then 4 on this very small driveway. And oftentimes they park on the natural space near trees and so forth overnight. We've had in the summer egregious violations. Security has had to come out 3 times in a day from noise, parking, leaving things bicycles randomly all over the place, things like that. And we've met with the security people and management at Sea Pines, and they've really indicated to us that they're really kind of afraid of litigation. They're waiting on the town to set up some regulations. They realize that these properties aren't regulated. For instance, the property next to me is solely rented through VRBO. So there's no on-site, on-island management to contact. We've contacted the owner one time, and I think he told my wife to lose his number. And I can repeat crazy things, waking up 9 in the morning, having a boombox at this pool that is maybe 12 feet from my living room, with 25 people at a yoga class going 9 in the morning on Saturday. I'll give you an example of 6 SUVs in a short term coming back from the restaurants or the bars at 12 to 2 in the morning, and each one double fobbing their beeper so that you have a space of maybe 20 minutes for an hour and a half between horn honks set off by a fob. And if you're sleeping, that wakes you up, you go back to sleep, and then the next car that comes back hits their fob twice, the horn goes off, you wake up again. That's not even to mention the yelling and so forth. And we've had frat parties where they've gone out, met people at the bars, and brought huge parties back. And the security from Sea Pines will come out at 11 at night and say, can you keep it down? And an hour later, you have people yelling, screaming, where can I go to the bathroom? Running out into the common area, going to the bathroom. And to police this is like crazy. It's costing Sea Pines money. It's driving the neighbors. My neighbor on the other side of me said, please don't sell your house. Then we'll be right next to it. So if you just put a gun to my head and said, how can you eliminate this? I would say, in Sea Pines anyway, you'd limit to 1 month short-term rental. Then the people have some kind of vested interest in the people on either side of them. But when you're renting for a week, 4 days, for over $1,000, by the way, they're going to pile in as many people as they can, oftentimes, to justify a renter renting for over $1,000 a night on a patio lot. And it's just there's no reaction to the owner when you're going through VRBO and there's no one to talk to. And VRBO, they really don't care. Trust me, it's an on-site money collection agency. It works to contact VRBO on the phone or any way, meaningful way. Good luck. And it's a debacle. Right now in the wintertime, without, outdoor noise events going on, it's fine. But as soon as the weather gets warm enough for a pool usage, then it gets absolutely crazy. I mean, to the point where we're thinking of selling our house. And that's great for the realtors to have churning in residential neighborhoods, I'm sure. But I've lived here for 20 years and I would like to continue living here, as my wife would.
Thank you for your comments, sir. I appreciate that. We've heard many folks who have a serious reduction in their quality of life due to problems with short-term rentals. And I'm sorry for the problems that you've had. You've echoed a number of the comments that we've received, a need for someone to respond to issues and have an immediate contact point, and also just the occupancy for the size of the house that we've heard in previous comments and in meetings. So thank you for your comments. I appreciate it. Ms. Erdley?
Hey, Ann, I just have a real quick question, actually asking if the chat portion of this is not working. I know it says it's disabled. It's not working on my screen. So can we make that live, please?
Yes, ma'am. I think our option is the Q&A. If you type the Q&A and type a question in there, staff will answer it for you.
Okay, I just know the chat was very valuable yesterday during the resident conversation. So, okay, thank you.
I think you'll be able to get your question answered through the Q&A, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John? John Monroe? You might have to unmute yourself, John.
Okay, yes, thank
Hi,
you.
John.
Sorry about that. I work for Sea Pines Resort, been here for 22 years, and I'm sorry to hear the previous property owners' experience. That's having an absentee property owner that's not involved and doesn't care. And we can understand how that can happen. It doesn't happen at Sea Pines Resort, I can promise you that. We just don't have those issues because, we follow the rules. We've got a great relationship with Sea Pines Security. So we don't, a brick and mortar short-term rental company like us and many others, or most others on the island, would never let that happen. So I can see how that can happen with an absentee property owner without a local contact that can respond within an hour. I was surprised to hear the comments about Sea Pines Security not taking care of the issues, because quite honestly, if I had any of those issues, Toby McSwain, the director of security, would be calling me and they would enforce it. So it does surprise me that the security is allowing those things to happen. I've been here 22 years and I find just the opposite. I get phone calls. And the last thing I had, just another comment on the economic impact. I think that is just so incredibly important. And quite honestly, I don't think it has been considered until recently by the town. But not only is taxable income to the town, but if there's less vacationers on the island, there's going to be less people in the retail shops, less people in all of our restaurants, and business will go down, unemployment will go up. But just as important is the real estate market. And I know you've been talking to the board of realtors, but I couldn't imagine what a over-regulated short-term rental ordinance, just like the one at Kia, which your consultant developed, where they've drilled down to the street, on a street level, and identified how many dwelling units, and then they put a 20% cap can be rental units. I could not imagine what that would do to the real estate market here. People would not be purchasing real estate if they did not know that they can rent their property. It just wouldn't happen. So I think it's so important that you hear that you do a complete study in all aspects, from tax income to retail businesses on the island to real estate. And who are you going to hire to do that? Do you know yet?
John, I just want to make respond to a couple of your points. I appreciate that the 1 hour response time you noticed, I think, or that you mentioned, I think is something that we've heard from a number of folks, that folks need an immediate response if they're having nuisance issues. I appreciate your point. I understand your concerns about overregulation. We've heard that loud and clear from a number of folks. And you mentioned the ordinance that Kiowa adopted. The town will create standards that are right for the town. We're not going to take an off-the-shelf solution just because that's available. What we want to do is craft regulations that make sense for us, and understanding very clearly that there are huge economic implications to any regulations that we put in place. In terms of an examination of the impact of short-term rentals as part of the economy and the impact on the tourism industry, that's part of a conversation we're just having right now in terms of studying the island-wide conditions and trends. That is part of the town strategic plan. So we're looking into those carefully and seriously with a MKSK consulting company. Did you have any other questions or comments, John?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Mr. Howell?
Yes, thank you. We are property owners there in Sea Pines. We have actually been coming to Hilton Head Island for over 30 years in one way, shape, or form. We love the island. We made a decision to buy a 3-bedroom villa back in 2013. And clearly the factor of buying that was that we would be able to rent that unit when we are not there to pay for the various fees, whether they be, Sea Pines fees or taxes or insurance or whatever. Any limitation on short-term rentals, and one of the gentlemen said should limit Sea Pines to less than to a month. That would be disastrous for most of the people who have short-term property rentals. Need that, kind of burst of income that you get in the March and April, May timeframe, where people are coming for a week at a time, whether it be for the tournament or whether it be for some other special reason or just vacations. And I think that would be very, very damaging to many of us who own villas and other things, other properties in the island. And I really just don't understand many of the complaints that I've heard listening to this webinar can also be solved. And I understand the gentleman from Sea Pines who just talked as well, by resort companies managing their tenants. And I do think that that's something that can be done better. I think that there are times when tenants are not held accountable for damage to property. We've had that happen ourselves. And I think that the resorts should take a little bit more ownership of that. But I do think that, Sea Pines Resort does a reasonably good job on most things. And others in the, Palmetto Dunes, others that we've stayed in the past have done a reasonably good job as well. I just want to make sure that you understand and the gentleman from Sea Pines just discussed real estate values. Clearly, those values would be, I would say, very critically damaged if indeed, especially for a place like ours, if indeed short-term rentals were taken away. And I'm just not really sure that I see the problem you're trying to fix can't be solved in other ways as opposed to limiting the time for short-term rentals.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hall. I appreciate that. And I appreciate your thoughts on minimum night stay. I don't think that there's necessarily a desire or a specific direction to limit the minimum number of nights stay. I think that was a tool that's discussed that other communities have used that we can discuss as an option. But I appreciate your point about expectations for owners or managers for their guests. And I think through education, I think we found that with the sea turtle protection standards that we have, the education, it does take some time, but I think education is a way to improve expectations for folks and let them know how our island is special and how they can enjoy our island and fit in with our community standards. Thank you, sir. Ms. Hutchins?
Hi, Anne. Thank you so much for your careful responses. I really appreciate them. And I wanted to follow up on several of them because we moved here a year and a half ago for health reasons. We live in Hilton Head Plantation, and I'm also a realtor. So I love informing clients on what the pros and cons are to the different areas that are self-regulating. And I think overall they're doing an amazing job. And I think that's why there's so much discussion on this issue. I really like how Mr. Howell said that he doesn't see the problem you're trying to fix. And when you replied to somebody earlier, and I've forgotten, I think it was maybe Mr. McCammon, that there are some complaints and that's why the investigations are going forward. But can you give us an idea of how vocal, how widespread the complaints are? Is it a vocal minority? Because again, like somebody else said, I'm concerned that you're going to make a potential new regulations that's going to encompass and hit a lot more areas and cause a lot more problems rather than really fine tuning and focusing on what the specific problems are. And a lot of people have mentioned enforcement. And is there a sort of a balance of why adding new restrictions when you can't enforce completely the ones that we have? And culturally, we're going through a lot. So I'm just curious in terms of like, let's not mess up more issues instead of fixing maybe the significant ones, that people are having.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchins. I appreciate your points. We've heard many comments like that. Let's, in my words, let's not make a mountain out of a molehill. I think that we can, in looking at this, look at a few different levels of issues. I think there are basic community expectations that most folks have and that you've heard, short-term rental owners say that they have for their guests. You won't be noisy, you'll park where you're supposed to park, you'll take care of your trash, you'll, be a respectful neighbor. I think most people would agree with that. Now, we don't currently have a short-term rental ordinance. We're developing that right now. So we don't have those standards that are in place on a uniform level for the entire island. And there are larger issues, I think, that would have huge implications for folks' investments. If there were limitations on the total number of short-term rentals or occupancy limits. And I think we need to very carefully consider any regulations we would propose before moving forward. But I take your point that there are folks who are having issues, and I think that those issues need to be addressed, but we need to do it in a very thoughtful and balanced way. Thank you very much. Is it Ms. Gugliotti? Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did, yes.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for joining us.
Sure, no, thanks for having these meetings. So I own a short-term or a condo in Hilton Head that I use. It's a mix of I rent it and I use it. I live in the Columbia area, so I rent it to offset the costs of having the condo. And a lot of the quality of life issues that people have discussed, and I've heard in another meeting and in the survey, most of these neighborhoods are controlled by HOAs, and HOAs typically address these issues. So it's more, these issues should be brought to the neighborhood HOAs versus the town. I know when you move in, you get a copy of the bylaws, and you move in knowing what the rules of that neighborhood are. And if you don't like those rules, you wouldn't have bought or moved into that neighborhood. And I know in the neighborhood that I'm in, we have, if there's issues, we address our board and it goes to the HOA. And if we need to make new rules, they make new rules. So I'm just concerned that the town is looking to get involved on a wider scale when a lot of this is already being done by neighborhood HOAs that are in a better position to regulate for the needs of that particular neighborhood or resort or development.
Sure, I take your point. We've heard that from a number of folks that, I live in a neighborhood that has an HOA or a POA, and they take care of things, and we don't have any problems. And I have heard, and we've heard from some folks who've said, I live in an area with an HOA or a POA, and I still have problems. They don't do anything about it. So we have heard a lot about that topic, and I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Is it Mr. Lauer? Sir, you may need to unmute yourself.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
Can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. I was a resident of Sea Pines, and I was on the CSA board and the ASPO board. And when I was on the board about 8 years ago, 70% of the residents in Sea Pines were part-time or not there at all. It was strictly income property. I'm moving back to Hilton Head from Charleston in about a week, 3 weeks. That's if I can get a contractor to get all the materials on the renovation done. But the bottom line is, I think there are a number of things that need to be looked at. I think one of them is the absentee owner not being physically there to see if 20 people come into a 3-bedroom because he doesn't know. He doesn't know how many people come. And the other thing is that basically the VRBOs and the Airbnbs kind of make that happen. They're easy to use. They're getting more expensive, but they're easier to use. And so therefore, maybe instead of a blanket ruling, and I'm sorry. And the other thing is, I really think when I lived in Sea Pines, I noticed that anything less than a week in a rental was a disaster. You get bachelorette parties, bachelor parties, you get weekenders, the people come in Friday, leave on Sunday night. I think at least a short-term rental ought to be looked at. Somebody suggested a month. I think that's way too long, but at least a week, because that is something that I think people will take care of a little bit better because they are going to be there a week. But I think maybe we limit the VRBOs and the Airbnbs, and we go into rental institutions and rental businesses that actually have a presence on the island. And maybe they can make sure that if somebody says we're going to have, 2 adults and 3 kids, that it is 2 adults and 3 kids and not, 15 other people with, 3 or 4 SUVs. I just think blanket rulings are not what we want. And I think the person before me mentioned POAs. I've lived in a little area in Sea Pines that did have their own POA. It wasn't much of a POA, but at least we had the Sea Pines resort to police the issues. And living in now going to be in Shipyard, I'm assuming we can look at the same opportunity, because we're going to probably be there maybe 10 months of the year, but not during the summer. And so obviously, for me, I would like to be able to do it in the summer and do it at a week at a time and nothing less. But I think that might help.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. We've heard from a number of folks that they would like a speedy response to any issues that come up. And a number of owners have said, I can provide that speedy response, and I do. So, but we've heard that also occupancy, a minimum night stay, and having someone who can physically respond to issues. We've seen that in a research for a lot of different communities, regulations. I think that's a pretty standard regulation that we'll need to take a look at and consider. Thank you very much. Mr. Bostancic? Is it Mr. Bostancic?
Wow, you did a great job. I've heard them all. That's pretty good.
Is it Bostancic? Did I get it right?
Yeah, you did.
Did I really?
Impressive.
Oh,
yeah.
All right. Thank you for joining us.
Well, great. Thank you for having these forums and the number of opportunities people have to join in the different forums. I appreciate that. Just one question and one comment. Parking, noise, and trash just seems a recurring theme. I'm sure you've probably heard it on and on and on and on. Regulating that, again, I don't understand why the town needs to get involved when you have very robust, in many areas, HOA, POAs, regimes that monitor that, have security on site, have personnel to handle that. So again, I just think it's a bit of an overreach for the town to get involved in these areas that are handled primarily by very strong, well-written HOA documents. The HOAs have an incredible amount of control and power and authority of the people in their communities. And I just don't see the city or the county or the town having the same. So I don't understand the involvement there. The question is, are you looking at a difference between condo communities like Hilton Head Beach and Tennis and some other ones versus single family? Because they're very different, and one size does not fit all. So is that something that's going to be addressed, those two different types of rentals?
Thank you, sir. We've heard exactly those comments. We've heard that folks say, I am in a large gated community that has the resources to properly manage short-term rentals. And the entire spectrum, moving through folks who are in POAs or HOAs that are active, those that are inactive, those that are on paper only, and folks who are just not in any kind of regulated area. So I think there's a huge difference between those for folks. And yes, I take your point about single family houses versus condos. Some of the concerns that we've heard, I think, are by the nature of condos, physical limitations, and the fact that they are grouped together in a larger area and usually have a property manager, that folks have a different experience between the two of those. So I appreciate your differentiating in your points. Thank you. Okay. Just a reminder for those who might have joined us after we started, at the bottom of your screen, there's a raise hand button. If you click that button, we'll know that you want to ask a question or make a comment. And there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you can type in a question and someone who's on our staff can answer that question for you. Mr. Hensler? Mr. Hensler, you may need to unmute yourself.
Hi, how you doing?
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome. I appreciate you guys doing this. So I'm an island native. I've been here a long, long time, and I'm also a realtor that specializes in vacation rental sales. I have seen firsthand, of course, the changes that the island has made in terms of how many rentals coming in and things like that. But I've also seen the awards that the island has received. I see that the town of Hilton has done a very good job of trying to keep the island as in, in a beautiful, pristine way to be able to continue to receive these awards and keep the island as a special place. Now, I also see the importance of the rental income for my clients that I have.
Sorry, I think.
I was getting a call. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
I've seen the importance of the rental income that my clients have purchased. Now, I advise people to say, hey, you should be at least have a nest egg of 3 to 6 months when you purchase a rental property. But at the same time, if you guys were to change some of these rental parameters and say limit rentals to 10 people or less, and let's just use an example of a home on Burke's Beach, which I believe the ownership, the full-time residents there's 3 currently in Burke's Beach. The rest of them are rental properties. These properties are built to house 25 people. And of course, I understand if parking is not adequate, then something needs to be done about that. But at the same time, these properties were purchased with expectation to pay for themselves. Somebody's buying a home for a vacation rental for their family, or I'm sorry, a vacation home for the family, but they need the rental income to pay. If you change those rental properties from 25 with a house comfortably to 10, of course, the value of that property, for one, goes down because the rental income is substantially less, but also the rental income goes down and creates a major issue for these people because, of course, when you go from, let's just say, $260,000 a year on that property to, gosh, $120,000, that makes it where these properties are not affordable anymore, which would then create a mass sell-off, which would then create a big price drop in values on the properties. And also, of course, the last thing I'll say is, if you allow less people to be in houses or you restrict that, what about the businesses, the restaurants and businesses that rely on tourism to stay afloat? The people that are working here that rely on the tourism, on the servers and things like that, that are relied on that income to stay, to be able to pay their bills. We're just concerned that it all could be just a snowball effect and ruin everything.
Thank you, Mr. Hensel. I appreciate your comments. We've heard loud and clear from folks that owners and investors have, expectations of the property that they purchased, and to radically change the ability to use their property in the way that they assume they could and were allowed to when they bought it is a huge consideration for folks. And we're taking that very seriously. I appreciate that comment and the associated effect of short-term rentals on the entire island's economy. Thank you so much. Is it Miss Zutz?
Zutz, yes, thank you.
Thank you.
First, thank you for hosting this. This is very valuable. I'm a short-term rental property owner. I live in Sea Pines. We've had our house for 4 years now. And I am sorry that some of these people have faced the kinds of problems, particularly the gentleman earlier on with, it sounds like a horrendous situation. My thoughts are one that I think that I don't think more regulation is the answer by any stretch of the imagination. I am concerned about the town of Hilton Head getting involved. I think that the community HOAs are really the way that we should pursue some of these and address some of these concerns. I also echo some of the other speakers who have stated that their property management companies are strong. I personally have I am so grateful for the property management company that I have. that is very responsive. I talk to them, or I am communicating with them several times a week. And I have full-time neighbors who have told me that they've really never had any problems with our rental people, and we rent primarily during the summer. And just to address other concerns, Sea Pines in general we have vacationed there for 30 years prior to purchasing our property. And when I talk to other people and neighbors and so forth, that has seemed to be their experience as well. They have vacationed there and then they purchase property. But to limit the duration of a stay, of a short-term stay, I think is very questionable, particularly for more than a week. And Sea Pines in particular is a golf community. So we have a number of renters who are golfers who come for the weekend for 3 days. And that in the springtime, that's pretty frequently. So I just want to, throw those things out there. But I guess really what I'm trying to say is I think more regulation is really not the way to address some of these issues.
Thank you. I appreciate that point. I take your point about having a strong property management company. I think that effective and responsive management, whether that's the owner or someone designated by the owner who's just a family friend, or someone who's a professional property manager, I think alleviates a lot of the issues that can come up with short-term rentals. So thank you for your point. Mr. Herring?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just want to relay my personal experience with Hilton Head Island. My wife and I have been coming down there as visitors to the island for about 30 years. Up until July of last year, we were finally able to take our life savings and we invested it in a property in Palmetto Dunes in the Queens Grant community. And, we did that specifically to be able to rent the property. Otherwise, really, we wouldn't be able to afford the property. Otherwise, we get, $20,000 in annual bills for HOA, POA, property taxes, insurance. And, when I first saw this whole thing coming to a head, it was almost went into panic mode. Like, were you be able to keep the property we just bought in July? And, we're going to be able to afford it if we're not going to be able to short-term rent it. So, we're definitely concerned about, the direction this is going. And I wanted to contribute something about the community that we're in because, we're new to it. Started renting our place out in July. We're not down there in the summertime. We both work, but, we're now getting more vacation time than we had before, and we're able to use the property more. But we did have an incident where one of our renters was leaving bikes where they didn't belong. And it took maybe a 15-minute notification from the property management company that was going on. I placed a simple phone call to the tenant and the problem was solved. So, I echo the sentiments of a lot of the other people I've heard today. And, I think the property management companies need to step up when these things are occurring and not so much the township.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I'm glad you've had a good experience with your property management company, and welcome to the island full time. I did want to mention, we've heard from many people, and we completely appreciate and understand the concern about investing in a property and having expectations of being able to rent that out short term. The importance of that is not lost on us, and the existing taxes and fees that are already paid for properties and those contributions to the community. Thank you for your comments. Is it Miss Press?
Yes, Press.
Press, thank you.
Yeah, my comment was, if you're, the tax rates are either you're a resident or you're a non-resident. And we do try to go down there, once a month or so, and we make lots of trips to Hilton Head. And, we pay in property taxes $4,400 more than the people who lived in our condo before we moved in. They were full-time residents. And one of the reasons we rented is to offset the cost. So if someone would say, we're not going to rent it, could we pay, a resident fee? I mean, I think that might cut down on some short-term rentals too, because the people who are renting it are usually doing it to cover the costs of their place. And, knocking $4,400 off the cost per year might make people rent less. So, I mean, when the part-time renters, if you're not renting your place, I just don't understand why the charging someone 3 times more on property taxes if you're not even renting it. You're just there part-time. It doesn't make sense to me. So that's it.
Okay, thank you for your comment. I appreciate that. We've heard a number of folks mention that difference between the 4% and 6%, I believe is the difference between the full-time residents and part-time residents and the effect that has on the property. I appreciate your contribution. Thank you. Mr. Reed?
Thank you. My name's Tom, and I'm on. I'm actually an owner of Charter One and the broker in charge, and I'm a former real estate attorney here on the island. And one of the beauties of this island are how well crafted the covenants and restrictions are for our planned unit developments, and how well crafted the master deeds are for what we all refer to as villas or condos. It allows for a great deal of self-governance. And let me give you an example of that. Port Royal used to be just like Sea Pines and Palmetto Dunes in that they had short-term rentals there. As a community, they looked at their issue and they decided as a community, we're not going to do that anymore. Lawton Villas in Sea Pines, Briarwood Villas in Sea Pines, they made similar decisions. The mechanisms were in place to govern, and so they self-governed. So I find it odd that it feels like government overreach in going into these communities and telling them how they are to run their communities. I certainly appreciate and feel badly for folks who are living next door full-time to these short-term rentals. I can tell you as an agent that I always advise my clients, if they're going to be here full-time, they don't want to come to the nuisance. There are other communities on this island that you can buy into that do not permit short-term rentals, and that way you can enjoy everything here on the island without engaging in that vacation short-term rental part of what this island offers. Now, if you start limiting the short-term rentals, you're going to have a severe impact on valuation. And like it or not, all pricing starts on the ocean. And if the cap is not raised on the ocean, then the pricing behind it cannot be raised. And I'll give you an example. Oceanside, median property values, Oceanside, from 2019 to the end of 2021, they were up 68%. The rest of the island was only up 46% over the same time period. So that difference in pricing, that is your investment buyer. So if you eliminate that, then you're doing damage to our local economy in many, many different ways that probably most people aren't even considering. So anyway, that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you very much. I take your point about overreach, and it's our intention to look at solutions that don't involve any more regulation that would absolutely be required. And we've heard that from a number of folks, and I appreciate that. And I also appreciate your insight about trends and the point about the importance of short-term rentals and making a regulation that would have far-reaching impacts. I think that need to be carefully considered before any kind of forward movement happens. Thank you very much. Is it Ms. Sawyer? You may have to unmute yourself, ma'am. So here. You, she unmuted
Yeah,
on our end?
ask
Okay.
her. Oh, there she is.
Oh, wait, there we go.
I think I have it. Do I have it?
We can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine.
I couldn't find where the button was for the longest time, and I'm not an expert Zoom user. We're part-time residents, and we're there because we love the island, but we also, when we wanted to go there very often, we were still working full-time, several hundreds of miles away. And so we have a lot of the same reactions that I've heard, and I won't repeat them. But I'm kind of heartbroken if residential neighborhoods where there wasn't an expectation of any rentals have disappeared somehow. And I don't understand, and I don't think the public information that's been put out explains what the loss of neighborhoods is that you reference in the basic purpose of the discussion. Could you explain that quickly and then perhaps post something that does a better job of explaining that?
Sure, and I thank you for joining us. I appreciate your comment. There are areas of the island that have always, residential neighborhoods that have always had some short-term rentals in them. Obviously, those that are closest to the beach, Forest Beach area. And depending on your location in the neighborhood, you may have had fewer or more short-term rentals. Those neighborhoods have experienced a transition, I think, with the increase in number of short-term rentals, especially more recently, where if they were further away from the beach and maybe further away from Pope Avenue, in the case of the Forest Beach area, are finding that houses that weren't short-term rentals or wouldn't have been in the market for short-term rentals have become short-term rentals. So residents are feeling the impacts of short-term rentals moving into those areas. And there are also short-term rentals moving into areas that traditionally I think you wouldn't think of as being tourist areas. There are a number of neighborhoods that I've heard. I was very surprised to hear short-term rentals that are far from what you consider the tourist centers of the island. So I think that's what that statement is trying to get at, is that transition from a more residential feeling to a more commercial feeling based on the use of short-term rentals in those areas. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate your comments.
We don't have any more questions.
Okay. For those of you who would like to make a comment or question, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a raise hand icon. And if you click on that, we'll know that you want to speak and make a comment or question. There's also the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen, where if you click on that and ask a question, someone who's with us with staff can answer your question. Okay. Well, looks like we have Mr. Howell.
Yeah, I asked you a question earlier, but one of the, after hearing all the discussion here, do you have a timeline that you're working to actually make decisions on this topic?
Sure. If you, I think we want to take an examination of the project timeline. If you look at the materials that are going to be published for the next Public Planning Committee meeting, the meeting will be held next Thursday, the 27th. If you look at those meeting materials, you'll see some notes that staff has about possibly some changes to the project timeline. So we'll discuss that during that public meeting. So I would encourage you to sign up for project updates that you're notified of upcoming meetings, and that you can review those materials well in advance of the meeting. And that link that you'll receive in the email will lead you to the meeting agenda. The meeting agenda will describe ways that you can comment either in the meeting, during the meeting, or send comments to the Public Planning Committee prior to the meeting. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We'll wait just another second to see if anyone else has any comments or questions. I'd like to,
I got two. Hold on one second.
oh, Mr. Buchanan?
Yeah, I spoke a little earlier, and it was very interesting listening to many of the short-term rental people on the island, and I understand where they're coming from. I think the importance of having an on-island management company is very, very positive. I really think the VRBO, Airbnb, no one there rental type situation is unfortunate. I think many of the HOAs and even Sea-Pines security has limited authority to go after nuisance abusers. If you really drill down to what they can do, if someone says, go jump in the lake, we're here to have a good time, they can maybe fine someone. The house next door to me rents for over $1,000 a night. And I think they have a fine for like $25 or something. And that doesn't stop anything. The nuisance noise and so forth continues. If you talk to, and I really want to applaud Toby McSwain and Sea-Pines for what they do, the reaction times and so forth, but they really have no teeth to really deal with abusers of local property covenants and so forth. And so for the town to issue regulation, I think that might be a solution. It also has to be enforced though. And whether abusers, renters who abuse or have tenants that abuse this in a common way or several times, maybe they could be curtailed for their rental, what we extend to them to rent times and so forth. I'm just thinking through, because our HOA is great, but we have if someone brought a lawsuit against us, we'd be tied up forever. And you get a litigious type renter, offsite investor, they don't care. And we don't have the money to go to court to say, you guys can't rent anymore to these nuisance people. So I'm sure some HOAs are strong and so forth, but even Sea-Pines has limited teeth to deal with real abusers. So I don't want that to become just an automatic solution, local HOAs and so forth. I think there does need to be something from the town that has teeth. So anyway, I very interesting to hear other comments, and I appreciate the time to feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCammon. I appreciate everyone participating. I think we've heard some really interesting feedback today. And I did want to note, and looking at the balance of types of enforcement from, I would consider education on that spectrum, but education all the way to, more severe, more severe enforcement. I think we need to take a look at all of those options. And one size fits all doesn't make any sense, but I think understanding what your options are important. It's interesting. I just was reading about a program through the Expedia company, I think, which manages a lot of the online companies, and they have a community program that tries to address renters specifically who go maybe between the different companies, but are problematic renters. So that if there's a number of issues with that specific renter, that they would try to block them from using the service. So I'm just looking into that to see what the options are with that. But those kind of tools are important. I think we need to understand them and see how we could possibly incorporate them into enforcement options for folks. Thank you for your comments again. Mr. Green, Ms. Green? You may need to unmute yourself.
We use VRBO as well, but we have a very specific contract they have to sign as renters, and you have to have a property manager that can deal with any issues. So to have a blanket statement saying VRBO, people who rent through VRBO are bad is not good, because those other two things in VRBO has the contract right on their site that the people have to accept, etc. So I just wanted to make that statement that they're not all in that camp. You have to have a property manager and you have to have a good contract. Thanks.
Thank you for your comment. Yeah, I think blanket statements about the type or ways that folks rent short-term rentals aren't helpful, but I think we all understand the nuance between different owners and different services, and I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Is it Ms. Krupe?
Yes, thank you.
Oh,
very
thank
good. Thank you, Ms. Green, because I was going to say the same exact thing. We had started with a management company, and we as owners care a lot more about our property than the management company that's just trying to get their commissions. And so we are VRBO, but my husband and I, we're very good at regulating. We have no complaints from our neighbors. So a blanket statement about VRBO or Airbnb, any of those rentals are not good for the island. I also agree with Ms. Green, is not a good route to go, because we take much better care of the property now than it was before. So I just wanted to make that statement.
Thank you. I appreciate the comment, and I appreciate you attending. Thank you. The Rosses?
Yes.
Hi. Thanks for joining us.
How are you?
Good. Thank you.
I just wanted to comment too, like Airbnb and VRBO, those have nothing to even do with property management. All they are an all they do is advertise your property. And then whoever's the host on those sites are either a property management company or the homeowner. So I think people don't even realize sometimes that VRBO and Airbnb have nothing to do with who's in your place or anything like that. They're just advertising properties, and it's the host that takes care of the property as obviously the property manager, or they hire a property manager. And most property managers are the only people pretty much that clean the place and rent it, through advertising and all that stuff. It's the homeowner that has to hire someone to look after the place, or if you're a homeowner that's not at the property, most of the time someone has to look at the place and take it, make sure everything's going right. And I just lost my train of thought real quick, but it's those sites have nothing to do with who's in the place or anything like that. It's pretty much, as people are staying to the associations and the rules of the properties and security and making sure nothing crazy is going on, is pretty much how those things should be handled and looked at, as far as to certain communities that have those rules and stuff like that. I just wanted to put that out as far as Airbnb and VRBO. That's it.
Thank you very much for joining, and thank you for your comments. Yeah, we've heard loud and clear that folks need to feel that someone will be responsive if there is an issue, whether that's the owner or a property manager or an agent that the owner sets up. That I think proper property management, I think, will resolve especially the nuisance issues for folks. Thank you. I got it right before, and I want to repeat. Is it Bastisic?
Oh no, you were better the first time, but that's okay.
I know.
You can have a mulligan. You can have a mulligan.
Slipping.
I just would, Ann, you've done a great job facilitating. Mr. Ames, I believe you are like a representative of the town. I didn't catch that. I I'd like to get your thoughts and observations of what you've heard today. And if you can give maybe short-term renters, owners, a lot of people have invested life savings, have fallen in love with the island, and have put their time, money, and energy into the island. Can you just give some assurances that we won't be over-regulated or overtaxed, and that there will be full consideration of both sides of this during this process?
Yes, there'll be, there will be, and it's happening over these last 2 days, a sincere effort to understand both sides of the discussion. I've learned an incredible amount listening to people and their points of view. I think the issue is nuanced to a degree and a complex solution. I don't know what's going to happen at this time, but I can assure you that the council and staff are looking at this not as a simple one size fits all, but a nuanced approach. I appreciate the comments that the public has made, and really the council's role in these meetings is to listen and learn and have the competent moderation being done by Ann. And so I'll get off and I'll continue listening. Thank you, though.
Thank you, Mr. Ames.
Do not have any more.
Okay, just as a reminder, if you want to make a comment or ask a question, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a raise hand button. If you click on that, we'll know that you want to speak. And then at the bottom of your screen, there's also a Q&A button. And if you click on that and type in a question, one of the staff members who's with me today will answer that question. While we're waiting, I'll make another plug. If you haven't already filled out the survey, please be sure to visit the town's website and complete the survey. And that'll give you also a list of upcoming meeting dates, a way to submit questions, and a way to view recordings from previous meetings where the committee has discussed the short-term rental initiative. And be sure to sign up for project updates. So you'll get emails notifying you of upcoming meetings, and you'll receive a link to their agendas and packet materials. I'll give one more second for any last minute questions or comments that anyone might want to make before we wrap up.
Oh, I participate. Hold on.
Is it Mr. Yekik?
It's Yekich. Good attempt. I do have a question. I know from previous meetings that the town has hosted, I guess it has been mentioned that the goal is to have, I guess, whatever decision that is made implemented, I guess, at the start of this coming season. Is that still the goal, or I guess the idea that, I guess, to implement whatever the decision is made for this coming year?
That decision would be up to the committee. I know that there is a strong desire to address some of the issues that we have, particularly the nuisance issues. But I think that ultimately will be a decision of the committee. But I would encourage you to sign up for the project updates and listen to the upcoming Public Planning Committee meeting on Thursday, January 27th. The meeting starts at 10 a.m. and we're going to be publishing the agenda and packet materials for that meeting shortly. That should be in advance of the meeting, so you have a chance to review those, see what's going to be discussed at the meeting, and have an opportunity to participate. But thank you for joining us today. I appreciate it. Okay. If there's no one else, oh, we might have one more.
Disappeared.
Okay, all right. Well, I greatly appreciate Town Councilman Mr. Ames, Ms. Becker, and Mr. Lennox for joining us today. Thank you so much. And thank you very much to Renee Phillips for helping us take care of the technology for this, to be able to host this webinar. To Terry Lewis, Nicole Dixon, Teresa Haley, and Jamie Lopko, who are the staff behind the camera helping out. And we have a strong team working on this initiative, and we really appreciate your participation in this initiative as well. Thank you. Just a note, we do have more upcoming meetings. The one this afternoon that is from 3 to 5 is focused on short-term rental owners, but everyone's welcome to attend. And again, if you haven't already, please take the survey and sign up for project updates. And we'll close out today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us.